It took exactly 9 words for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to realize she'd just insulted the wrong Southern gentleman. Perhaps the senator should take an economics class. 9 words. That was all it took. 9 words spoken with such effortless condescension, such reflexive arrogance, and such absolute intellectual certainty that she never saw the trap she was walking into, never saw the lion she was poking, and never realized that the folksy Southern lawyer with the reading glasses and the massive accordion file was about to give her an education she'd never forget. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me set the scene, because the context makes this takedown so much sweeter. It was a joint House-Senate hearing focused on economic policy and American competitiveness, one of those typical Washington spectacles that usually produces nothing but sound bites and partisan talking points. The hearing room was packed to the rafters. C-SPAN had several cameras rolling, knowing that with AOC testifying about her Green New Deal proposals, fireworks were bound to happen. She sat at the witness table, flanked by squad members in the gallery behind her, looking every bit the confident young revolutionary with her designer frames, bold red lipstick, and that practiced expression of earnest concern for the working class. She'd been testifying for about 45 minutes, tossing out buzzwords like intersectionality, systemic change, and transformative justice without anyone challenging her on what any of it actually meant. Then, it was Senator John Kennedy's turn to ask questions. He sat at the far end of the committee bench, bifocals perched on his nose, organizing papers from an accordion file so absurdly thick that it looked like a prop from a comedy sketch. He looked like every Southern lawyer you've ever seen. A slightly rumpled suit, his tie just a bit askew. He had that thick Louisiana drawl that made every sentence sound like he was telling a story on a front porch somewhere. Easy to underestimate, fatal to dismiss. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice sounding both friendly and curious, "I've been listening to your testimony about the Green New Deal, and I have to admit, I'm a bit confused by some of the numbers. Your plan calls for eliminating all fossil fuel use within 10 years, retrofitting every building in America, and guaranteeing jobs for everyone. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the cost at around $93 trillion over a decade. Now, the entire U.S. GDP is only about $25 trillion per year. So I'm just trying to understand." That's when she made her mistake. AOC interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "Senator, with all due respect, perhaps you should take an economics class instead of relying on outdated thinking from old Southern men who don't understand modern economic theory. The costs are investments, not expenses. And frankly, this kind of simplistic analysis is exactly why we need new leadership that actually understands the complexities of contemporary economic systems." The room went dead silent. Every reporter's head snapped up from their phone. The cameras zoomed in tight. Squad members in the gallery actually started looking nervous. They knew Kennedy's reputation, even if AOC apparently didn't. Kennedy slowly removed his reading glasses, set them down on the desk in front of him with exaggerated care, and smiled. That smile. Anyone who'd ever seen John Kennedy cross-examine a hostile witness knew that smile. It was the smile of a predator that just realized the prey walked right into the kill zone. He let the silence stretch out. 5 seconds. 10. 15. AOC shifted uncomfortably, perhaps beginning to realize she'd miscalculated. The committee chairman looked like he wanted to intervene, but couldn't figure out how. Finally, Kennedy spoke, his voice still smooth as honey. "Well now, Congresswoman, that's mighty generous of you to offer me some educational advice. Very kind. I truly appreciate that. He paused, the smile growing wider. I did take some economics classes, as it happens, at Vanderbilt University, where I graduated with honors. Then at the University of Virginia School of Law, where I studied constitutional economics and economic policy, and then at Oxford University, where I was a Rhodes Scholar and studied under Professor Johnwell, among others. Brilliant man. He really knew his economic theory. Another pause. He picked up a single document from his stack. You studied economics at Boston University. Is that right? International relations and economics, I believe. How'd you do in your econ classes? I'm just curious, since you're offering to educate me. AOC's face was starting to turn bright red, but Kennedy wasn't finished yet. But you know what? You're spot on about one thing. I'm an old-school Southern guy, guilty as charged, and I definitely lean on some old-fashioned logic, stuff like basic math, supply and demand, and how incentives drive results. You know, those outdated concepts. He flipped open his accordion folder, letting a mountain of papers spill across the desk. Since you figure I'm the one who needs schooling, why don't you go ahead and teach me? Let's walk through your Green New Deal one line at a time. I've got some questions. I've got your own words here, and plenty of them. Plus, I've got a whole stack of facts that I reckon might just catch you off guard. Kennedy looked straight into the lens of the C-SPAN camera. Folks at home, what you're about to see is exactly what happens when ideology runs headfirst into arithmetic. When pure confidence meets actual competence. When a bartender who took a few econ classes at BU tries to school a Rhodes Scholar economist, stick around. This is going to be a real education. He turned back toward AOC, and his look shifted. That folksy charm hadn't left, but there was something sharp and dangerous lurking beneath it. Let's start your lesson, Congresswoman. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, looking like the very definition of Southern comfort. Yet his eyes were razor-sharp as he reached for the first set of documents. Now, Congresswoman, before we dive into your plan to flip the whole American economy on its head, I'm curious about a little something. Look, you talk a lot about the wealth gap, the rich not paying their fair share, and the struggles of the working class. And I can respect that. Those are serious issues. But I'm having a hard time squaring your message with the way you actually live. Maybe you can help this old Southern man grasp the nuance I'm apparently missing. He produced a large photograph. He had it flashed onto the screen behind him. September 13th, 2021. The Met Gala. You showed up in a custom gown with "Tax the Rich" splashed across the back in giant red letters. It was a powerful statement. Very on-brand. The dress was a creation by Brothers, a high-end luxury brand. Now, you've claimed the dress was borrowed and the ticket was a gift, which is certainly convenient. But let's actually talk about that ticket. Kennedy pulled out a financial record. A single ticket to the Met Gala runs $35,000. $35,000, that's more than what many Americans earn in 8 months of working full-time. And there you were, at one of the world's most exclusive, elitist parties, surrounded by billionaires, millionaires, celebrities, and gowns worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, all just to make a point about taxing the wealthy. He looked up, appearing genuinely confused. Now, help me make sense of the economics here. You're telling working-class folks that the rich are the enemy, while you're literally rubbing elbows with them at an event that costs more than a year of community college. Where exactly is the nuance in that? AOC attempted to speak. It was about making a statement in places where... Making a statement. Kennedy cut in softly. I see. That's very important. Now, let's look at another statement you made with your choice of car. Then, he pulled out the DMV records. You drive a Tesla Model 3. It's a beautiful car and very eco-friendly. It costs around $48,000, depending on how it's equipped. Now, that happens to be $8,000 more than the median household income in your own district. A lot of the people you represent make less in an entire year than what your car cost. Kennedy leafed through his papers, narrating as he went. And you picked up this Tesla while pushing the Green New Deal, which would get rid of gas-powered cars. It would force Americans into electric vehicles they simply can't afford. See, the typical working person in your district can't just shell out $48,000 for a new ride. They can't afford a $1,200 home charging station. They can't afford the jump in their electric bill that comes with charging an EV. He looked up with an air of pure innocence. But you can. You've already got the Tesla, so your Green New Deal works out just fine for you. But what about that single mom working 2 jobs who depends on a 10-year-old Honda Civic to get around? Where is she supposed to find $48,000? Or should she just hop on the bus and show up late to both her jobs? The audience was absolutely captivated. Kennedy's tone remained friendly and curious, but those questions were hitting like heavy body blows. Now, speaking of where you live, Kennedy went on while pulling out rental agreements. You currently stay in a luxury apartment building in the Navy Yard area of Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful, very trendy neighborhood. Your rent is between $3,000 and $4,000 every month. He crunched the numbers out loud, slowly. That's $48,000 a year just for rent. Do you know what the average rent is in the Bronx? The very area you represent? It's about $800 a month. You're paying more than double to live in luxury in D.C. while you represent folks who are struggling to pay any rent at all. Kennedy pulled out some expense reports and held them high. And let's have a talk about your dining habits. Campaign finance reports reveal expenditures at some of New York and D.C.'s finest restaurants. We're talking team dinners at places where the cheapest entree starts at $65. Strategy meetings held over $400 bottles of wine. You've spent over $47,000 in campaign funds on high-end dining in just the past 2 years. He read from one receipt with exaggerated care. Here's one strategy dinner at Le Bernardin totaling $1,847. That's just one dinner, Congresswoman. One meal at a Michelin 3-star restaurant where the tasting menu costs $350 per person before wine. You spent almost $2,000 on one dinner while representing people who clip coupons to afford groceries.
Kennedy leaned back and stroked his chin thoughtfully. So, let me see if this old Southern man can understand your economic philosophy correctly. Let me try to grasp the nuance. Working-class Americans need to sacrifice. They need to give up their affordable gas cars for expensive electric vehicles they can't afford. They need to accept higher energy costs. They need to limit their consumption. They need to fundamentally change their lifestyles for the environment and for economic justice. He paused for effect. But you get the Tesla. You get the $3,400 a month luxury apartment. You get to attend $35,000 galas. You get to eat at restaurants where one dinner costs more than your constituents spend on food in a month.
You get to live exactly like the rich people you claim to oppose. His voice hardened just a fraction. That's not socialism, Congresswoman. That's not economic justice. That's aristocracy. That's let them eat cake with better branding. You're Marie Antoinette with an Instagram account and better publicity. You're telling people to sacrifice, while you sacrifice nothing. AOC tried to defend herself. My lifestyle isn't relevant to the policy. Your lifestyle is completely relevant. Kennedy's voice cracked like a whip, because it shows that you don't actually believe what you're preaching. If you really thought climate change was an existential crisis, You'd live in a modest apartment and donate the rent difference to environmental causes. If you really believed in economic equality, you'd live at the same level as your constituents. But you don't, because your socialism is for other people, not for you. He pulled out another thick folder. But if you think your lifestyle hypocrisy is bad, wait until we look at how you actually make your money. Because, Congresswoman, that's where your economic genius really shines through. Kennedy looked into the camera. If you're tired of champagne socialists who preach sacrifice while living in luxury, you need to hear what comes next. Because her lifestyle is just the appetizer. Kennedy shifted papers around and pulled out a new section marked with bright red tabs. His expression was somewhere between amusement and disgust. Now, Congresswoman, you tried to deflect by saying we should focus on systemic issues rather than individual choices. I love that progressive trick. Avoid personal accountability by making everything systemic. But let's talk about a system. Specifically, let's talk about the system you created to funnel campaign money to your boyfriend. He pulled out Federal Election Commission filings and held them up. Riley Roberts, your boyfriend, now fiancé if the tabloids are correct, nice young man I'm sure, went to BU with you. And since 2018, his company, the LLC he set up, has received over $120,000 in payments from your campaign for marketing and consulting services. Kennedy put on his reading glasses and studied the documents with exaggerated concentration. Now, I've run campaigns for over 20 years, and 120 grand for marketing is a substantial amount of money. So naturally, I had my staff research what Mr. Roberts actually delivered for that six-figure payment. What did his consulting accomplish? What were the deliverables? He looked up with innocent curiosity. Turns out, nobody knows. No portfolio, no case studies, no documented marketing materials beyond what your regular campaign staff produced. No client testimonials except from your campaign. He got paid $120,000 to do what exactly? Help you pick? Instagram filters, proofread your tweets, or tell you which selfie angle works best. Scattered laughter erupted from the conservative side of the gallery. AOC's face was turning crimson. But Mr. Roberts's consulting fees are just the beginning, Kennedy continued, pulling out merchandise sales reports. Let's talk about your real moneymaker, your campaign store, your merchandise empire. He held up a sweatshirt with the price tag still attached. Tax the Rich sweatshirt. Retail price? $58. Very popular with college kids who love socialism. You've sold thousands of these. Also available, Green New Deal t-shirts for $30. Abolish ICE hoodies for $65. Various other revolutionary merchandise. Over the last 3 years, your total sales have hit $4.2 million. Kennedy paused, letting that figure sink in. $4 million. Selling anti-capitalist gear to university students. The irony here is thick enough to spread on toast. He then produced a cost analysis spreadsheet. Now, let's take a look at your profit margins. That $30 t-shirt only costs about $4.50 to make, print, and ship. Yet you're selling it for $30. That's a massive 566% markup. You're actually pulling in better margins than most Fortune 500 companies. You've essentially become the exact capitalist pig your own slogans rail against. Kennedy leaned in, his voice heavy with sarcasm. And where exactly are these revolutionary clothes being made? Well, isn't that interesting? You refuse to say. Your campaign store doesn't mention the manufacturer at all. It's all very mysterious. However, independent journalists have done some digging, and it looks like production is happening overseas. Maybe Bangladesh, maybe Vietnam. It's definitely not made in America. And it's definitely not union labor. He looked her straight in the eye. So, to sum up your business model, you're raking in capitalist-level profits by selling socialist merch made by underpaid workers abroad. All this while you bash American capitalism and preach about workers' rights. Do I have that about right? AOC tried to cut in, but Kennedy held up a finger to stop her. Oh, I'm not finished with your financial genius just yet. Let's take a look at how your campaign is spending its money. He pulled out some detailed expense reports. Your campaign has dropped over $310,000 on luxury hotels and high-end dining in the last 2 years alone. Now, I get that campaigns have costs, but let me read off a few specific items because they're quite educational. Kennedy put his reading glasses back on and read slowly and deliberately. A team dinner at Per Se, $1,847. That's one of the priciest spots in all of New York. The tasting menu alone is $350 a head. A strategy meeting at Blue Hill, $1,240. Just another high-end Manhattan dining experience. A campaign retreat at a luxury resort, $47,000 for 1 weekend with your staff. First-class airfare, $89,000 in a single year when Coach would have been just fine. For accommodations, you spent $124,000 on 5-star hotels when Holiday Inns were an option. He set the papers down and looked up at her. You spent more on a single dinner at Per Se than many of your constituents spend on groceries in 2 months. You spent more on 1 weekend retreat than the average American family brings home in an entire year. And you did all of this while lecturing about economic justice and attacking the wealthy for their extravagance. Kennedy pulled out his calculator and crunched some numbers. Here's what really gets to me. If you had stayed in mid-range hotels instead of luxury ones, flown coach instead of first class, and held meetings at Applebee's instead of Michelin-starred restaurants, your campaign would have saved about $287,000 over 2 years. Do you know what you could do with $267,000 in a district struggling with widespread poverty? You could have funded scholarships, job training, or small business grants. Actually, helped real people. His voice grew cold. But you didn't do that. You chose luxury instead. You chose excess. You chose to live exactly like the wealthy elites you're always attacking. Because your brand of socialism is just that. A brand, not a belief system. Kennedy shifted gears and pulled out a new document. But let's get back to that economics education you offered me. You said I don't understand modern economic theory. So let's do some basic math. And I mean really basic, the kind of stuff they teach in high school. He pulled up a chart on the screen. Your Green New Deal proposes spending $93 trillion over the next 10 years. That's not my number. That's the official CBO estimate. $93 trillion. Let's put that into perspective. The entire U.S. GDP, everything America produces in a year, is about 25 trillion. So your plan would cost roughly 37% of the total U.S. economic output for an entire decade. Kennedy started writing on a whiteboard as he spoke. Now, you claim we'll pay for it by taxing the rich. Okay, let's look at that. The total wealth of every U.S. billionaire combined is roughly $5 trillion. If we confiscated, not taxed, but confiscated, every single penny from every billionaire in America, liquidated all their assets and took it all, we'd have $5 trillion. He circled the numbers on the board. Your plan costs $93 trillion. Taking everything from the billionaires only gets us $5 trillion. You're $88 trillion short. That isn't just a rounding error, Congresswoman. That is a mathematical impossibility. Kennedy turned to face her directly. So please, Go ahead and educate me. Use your modern economic theory. Explain how you pay for a $93 trillion plan when taking every dime from the billionaires' only nets, you $5 trillion. Show me the nuance I'm apparently missing. Walk me through the complexity of it all. Silence. AOC opened her mouth, then closed it again. She shuffled her papers, struggling to find the words. Kennedy's voice was deceptively soft. That's perfectly fine. Allow me to provide the explanation. The truth is, you simply can't fund it. It's a mathematical impossibility. You just conjured up a figure that sounds bold and visionary to people who haven't mastered basic addition. Yet, anyone with a fourth-grade education can see it's a total non-starter. He straightened his stack of documents. You see, Congresswoman, this is the result when a student who barely scraped through intro economics tries to school someone who learned from Nobel Prize winners. You clearly don't grasp fundamentals like scarcity, trade-offs, or how tax rates actually impact revenue. You do understand merchandising. You definitely understand branding. You certainly know how to funnel campaign cash to your boyfriend. Capitalism seems to make perfect sense to you when you're the one cashing the checks. Kennedy's tone suddenly turned razor-sharp. You suggested I take an economics course. Congresswoman, you're the one who needs a lesson in basic math, integrity, and how to spot hypocrisy in the mirror every single day. He reached for another heavy file. If you think your lack of economic sense is an issue, just wait until we look at the real-world fallout of your ideas. Let's dive into what actually happened when people took your advice. Let's talk about the Amazon situation. He looked directly into the camera lens. If you believe leaders should master basic addition before pitching multi-trillion-dollar schemes, you really need to hear this. Because we're about to see exactly what happens when your economic genius crashes into the real world. Kennedy's face dropped the sarcasm, turning much more somber. It was a look of pure frustration blended with genuine letdown. He produced a dense folder labeled Amazon HQ2 Economic Impact Analysis. Congresswoman, you've tried to highlight your wins, repeatedly calling the destruction of the queens. Amazon deal your crowning achievement. You took a victory lap for it. You labeled it a win in the fight against greedy corporations. You claimed you were shielding your neighbors from displacement and being taken advantage of. He flipped open the file as his tone grew even more stern. So, let's take a closer look at this so-called victory. Let's see what you actually delivered, because the residents of Queens deserve to know the price of your leadership. Kennedy pulled up an economic study for everyone to see. In November 2018, Amazon went public with plans for their second headquarters in Long Island City. The project promised 25,000 new jobs over the next decade or so. We're talking about an average paycheck of $150,000. The total economic boost over 10 years would have hit $27 billion. $7 billion. The city and state put up $3 billion in tax breaks, which sounds high until you realize the net tax take would have still reached $18 billion. Three different experts, one from the left, one from the right, and one independent, all crunched the numbers and reached the exact same result. This was a huge jackpot for New York. He reached for the employment forecasts, but it wasn't only those 25,000 direct roles at Amazon. The knock-on effect would have generated about 67,000 extra jobs throughout the community. Think about the crews building the actual site, the restaurant staff feeding all those new workers, the clerks in the new shops that would have popped up, countless roles in the service sector, new doors opening for small business owners, 75,000 jobs, all from a single project. Kennedy glanced up from his notes, his voice heavy with frustration. And you shut it down. You spearheaded the rallies. You leaned on the local leaders. You painted Amazon as a heartless giant that New York didn't need. So they walked away. They took those opportunities to Virginia instead. Virginia walked off with the jobs. Virginia collected the tax dollars. Virginia enjoyed the economic boom. And all Queens got was you. He grabbed a video player and set up some witness accounts. I'd like you to meet a few people. Congresswoman, real people, whose futures were altered when you blocked that deal. The first clip showed a middle-aged Latina woman in a simple living room. Meet Maria Torres. She's 52, working as an office assistant and bringing home $42,000 a year. When the HQ2 news broke, she put in for a construction admin job that paid $78,000. She actually got through to the second interview. She had the skills. She was genuinely hopeful. That position would have been a game changer for her. She could have cleared her bills, put her daughter through school, or maybe even seen a path to retirement. Kennedy paused the footage. But then you tanked the deal. Maria is still stuck at $42,000, still scraping by, and still living one paycheck at a time. But hey, at least you protected her from corporate greed, right? The next video featured a young Asian man in his late 20s. This is James Park, a CUNY computer science grad who grew up in Flushing. He's someone who truly loves his roots and his community. Amazon offered him a software engineering role with a $120,000 starting salary. When you ended that deal, James was left with a tough decision. Either stay in Queens without the job or pack his bags. He moved to Seattle to take that exact same position at Amazon. Kennedy's voice sharpened. James doesn't live in Queens anymore. His family is still there. His friends are still there. His entire community is right there. But he isn't, because you decided that fighting corporate greed was more important than keeping talented young people in their own neighborhoods. Virginia and Washington got James. Queens is the one that lost him. Quite a victory, Congresswoman. A third video shows a clearly devastated older man sitting inside what looks like a shuttered restaurant. This is Robert Santos. He ran a restaurant near the proposed Amazon site for 32 years. When Amazon first announced the project, Robert saw a massive opportunity. He took out loans to expand, hired more staff, and invested in a kitchen upgrade. He was getting ready for the boom. Kennedy paused the video, his voice heavy with emotion. When you killed the deal, Robert was left buried under debt he couldn't pay, and overhead he couldn't manage. He held on for 18 months, but finally closed his doors in 2000. 32 years in business and a family legacy are gone. Because you didn't understand that sometimes business growth actually helps working people. He produced a detailed report. Robert isn't the only one. 47 small businesses in the Long Island City area went under between 2019 and 2020. They had expanded specifically in anticipation of Amazon. They had hired new staff. They had invested their own money. And when you pulled the rug out from under them, they collapsed. Kennedy's voice was full of energy now. You can hear the genuine anger coming through. But let's look at the bigger picture here. Consider those 67,000 jobs that were supposed to be created. Let's put that into human terms. That represents 67,000 families who could have had better incomes. That's kids who could have gone to college. That's parents who could have retired with some dignity. That's regular people who could have afforded health care, bought homes, and built wealth. All gone because of your economic illiteracy. He held up the tax revenue projections. Think about the $18 billion in net tax revenue that New York completely lost. You know what that could have funded. Schools, infrastructure, housing programs, and all the social initiatives you claim to support, yet you killed the very deal that would have paid for them. Kennedy walked toward her position, his friendly manner now completely gone. And here is the most infuriating part. 6 months after you destroyed 25,000 jobs in Queens, where did you move from your modest Bronx apartment but to a luxury building in Navy Yard, D.C.? Your rent jumped from $1,600 to $3,400. You could afford that upgrade because you're making a $174,000 congressional salary plus all that merchandise income and your speaking fees. His voice was dripping with pure contempt. Maria Torres doesn't get an upgrade. She's still in the same apartment, still struggling on the same salary. James Park was forced to leave his home. Robert Santos lost his entire business. But you're doing fantastic, living in luxury, driving a Tesla, and attending fancy galas. The consequences of your decisions don't seem to affect you at all. Kennedy returned to his desk and pulled out one final document, asking what the cruelest irony of all was. Amazon is doing just fine. They simply took the deal to Virginia instead. Like I said, they're building HQ2 there right now, creating those same jobs and generating that same economic growth. Everything you predicted would happen in Queens is happening. It's just happening in Virginia. You didn't actually stop Amazon. You didn't land a blow against corporate greed. You just robbed your own constituents of a real opportunity. He looked directly at her, his voice quiet but incredibly sharp. You weren't fighting corporate greed, Congresswoman. You were fighting opportunity. You were fighting prosperity. You were fighting against working-class families who were just trying to get ahead. And you did it from a position of privilege that none of them will ever experience. Kennedy gathered his papers. Those 25,000 jobs are a reality now in Virginia, paying $150,000 a year and supporting families while creating new opportunities. Every single one of them could have been in Queens, could have been your constituents, and could have been Maria, James, or the families who shopped at Robert's restaurant. His voice rose to a powerful peak. But you decided that your ideology was more important than their opportunity. You decided that your brand as an anti-corporate warrior was more important than people's livelihoods, and Queens will be recovering from your decision for decades. He looked straight into the camera. If you know someone who lost out because of the Amazon decision, or if you're tired of politicians who sacrifice real people for political points, if you understand that sometimes business growth actually helps communities, then share this, because those 67,000 lost jobs deserve to be remembered. Kennedy turned back toward AOC. But we're not done examining the consequences of your economic genius. Let's talk about another brilliant idea you championed: defunding the police. And how did that work out for everyone? Kennedy reached for a new folder, his face a mix of sharp frustration and deep sorrow. Congresswoman, back in 2020, you were at the forefront of the movement to defund the police. You stood side by side with activists. You delivered rallying cries. Your social media was a constant stream of it. You made this your personal crusade. So, let's take a hard look at the reality that followed when people actually followed your lead. He produced a list of her very own words. I'm going to read back a few of your own statements. June 2020. Defunding the police means exactly what it says. July 2020. We must completely rethink the way we handle public safety. August 2020. Police departments are, by their very nature, violent institutions. I'm not taking these out of context. These represent your core values, your personal beliefs, and the policies you pushed for. Kennedy flashed the crime data onto the screen. New York City actually took your advice. In June of 2020, the City Council pushed through a $1 billion cut to the NYPD's budget. $1 billion. You treated it like a victory. You claimed it was a major win for justice. But let's talk about the real price of that victory. He began reading the NYPD crime stats, but he didn't treat them as just numbers. In 2019, before those budget cuts, New York City saw 319 murders. In 2020, after the police were defunded, that number spiked to 468. That's an extra 149 lives lost to murder. That isn't just a data point, Congresswoman. That represents 149 grieving families. That's 149 funerals and 149 stolen futures, all because the police force you stripped down couldn't keep them safe. Kennedy's tone became even more somber. The number of shootings exploded from 77 to over 1,500. Grand larceny, which is serious theft, surged by 66%. Burglaries rose by 42%. Felony assaults climbed 17%. Crime went up in every single major category. The city became objectively, dangerously less safe because of the very policies you fought for. He pulled out a stack of letters and held them high. I have personal accounts from the people who actually paid the price. I want to read you one of them. Kennedy's voice wavered with emotion as he began, "Dear Senator Kennedy, my name is Carmen Ramirez. I'm a resident of the South Bronx, right in Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's district. On March 15, 2021, my 19-year-old son, Marcus, was just walking home from his shift at the grocery store. Two men cornered him and tried to rob him. He only had $47 on him, his tips from that night. They ended his life over $47. I dialed 911 at 10:47 p.m. The police didn't get there until 11:10 p.m. 23 minutes. Before the police budget was cut, the average response time here was 8 minutes. 8 minutes. If they had made it in 8 minutes, maybe Marcus would still be here today. Maybe I'd still have my boy. Maybe I'd have grandchildren to look forward to. But the Congresswoman said we had to defund the police. She promised we'd be safer. She was wrong. My son is gone, and I haven't heard a single word from her." The room fell into a heavy, absolute silence. Kennedy set the letter back down with great care. "Carmen sent that letter half a year ago. You still haven't reached out to her. You haven't even acknowledged Marcus's existence. Yet, you've managed to film dozens of Instagram videos about police brutality. It's funny how your priorities work." He grabbed another letter. This one is from a man named David Chen. He ran a grocery store in Flushing for 4 decades. After the budget cuts led to a shortage of officers, his business was hit by robbers 3 times in 1 year. Every single time, it took more than an hour for the police to show up. Every time he pleaded for more patrols in the area. And every time he was told they simply didn't have the manpower. By December of 2021, he finally closed his doors. It was just too dangerous and too costly to hire private security without any police help. 40 years of service to his neighborhood. Wiped away. Kennedy looked up, his voice turning cold and sharp. But this is where your hypocrisy becomes truly stomach-turning. He produced the records for security spending. While you were stripping police protection from everyday New Yorkers, how much public money was spent keeping you safe. Well, let's see. Capitol Police protection while you're in D.C. cost $387,000 in 2021 alone. Then there's your NYPD security detail whenever you're in New York. That's another $120,000, totaling over $500,000 in taxpayer money to protect you, even as you strip it away from the people you represent. Kennedy pulled up the Capitol Police logs, showing that you haven't just been a passive recipient of that protection. You've actually filed 17 requests for extra security in just 2 years because of protests, mean tweets, or online threats. The moment you feel even slightly threatened, you demand more police. His voice climbed with a sense of righteous fury. Let me see if I've got this straight. When you feel frightened, you get a team of armed officers. When Carmen Ramirez's son walks home from work, he gets a 23-minute wait and a casket. When you deal with internet trolls, you get a personal security detail. When David Chen's store is being looted, he gets a voicemail saying there are no officers available to help. You get to be protected. But the working-class people in dangerous neighborhoods? They get reimagined public safety. Kennedy stood up and started walking toward her. What exactly does that reimagined safety look like to Carmen Ramirez? It looks like burying her child. And what does it look like to David Chen? It looks like losing his life's work. What does this actually mean for the thousands of New Yorkers caught in this crime wave? It translates to slower response times, fewer officers on the street, and the realization that their representative values political theater over their own safety. He presented the comparative data. You want to know something interesting? In New York's elite neighborhoods, where your donors and celebrity friends live, they just hired private security once you defunded the police. Crime barely even budged there. But in low-income neighborhoods and working-class communities, crime skyrocketed because private security is a luxury they can't afford. They have to rely on the public police force, the very police force you dismantled. Kennedy's voice took on a sharp edge. Your defund agenda essentially created a two-tiered system. The wealthy get private protection. The poor get hit with crime. You enjoy $500,000 in police security. Meanwhile, Carmen Ramirez is left with a dead son and a phone that never rings back. He sat back down. That isn't criminal justice reform, Congresswoman. That is an aristocracy. That's you hiding behind walls and armed guards, while your own constituents are out there dodging bullets. And yet, you still have the audacity to lecture people on privilege and systemic injustice. Kennedy stared directly into the camera lens. If you or someone you love has been a victim of this rising crime, if you're fed up with politicians who demand safety for themselves while stripping it away from you, if you believe Marcus Ramirez deserved better than being ignored, share this video everywhere. He turned his attention back to AOC. But I want to highlight one more case of moral bankruptcy because it reveals your true character more than anything else. Let's discuss your grandmother. Kennedy's tone dropped to a near whisper, though the underlying fury was clear. Congresswoman, back in June 2021, you shared photos on social media of your grandmother's house in Puerto Rico. The roof was still wrecked from Hurricane Maria, which had hit 4 years earlier in 2017. The living conditions were absolutely heartbreaking. You laid the blame on Trump. You blamed the federal government. You blamed everyone but yourself, using your own grandmother's hardship to score points online. He pulled up the social media posts and displayed them on the screen. You wrote, "Just over a week ago, my abuela got sick. I traveled to Puerto Rico to see her, my first visit in 10 years. This is where she lives." The relief from Hurricane Maria still hasn't arrived. Trump cut off the aid money for PR. People are being forced out of their family homes so developers can move in. Kennedy looked up from the screen. It was very moving and very emotional. The post got huge engagement, with people expressing both sympathy and rage. How could the government just let this happen? How could an elderly woman be left to live like this? He pulled up several news articles. Then, something quite interesting took place. A conservative commentator named Matt Walsh launched a GoFundMe to help your grandmother out. He wanted to show that Americans care about each other, regardless of their politics. And do you know what the result was? People actually donated. Republicans, independents, and even some Democrats chipped in. They raised over $100,000 in just 3 days. That's $100,000 intended to fix your grandmother's home. Kennedy paused for effect. Let that sink in for a moment. And how did you react? You turned it down. You made your family refuse the money. Your grandmother was left living in that house with a broken roof. And do you want to know why? He pulled up the official statement from her spokesperson. Your spokesperson claimed, "We don't need money from right-wing agitators." That was your official stance. The money came from the wrong people, so your grandmother wasn't allowed to have it. You'd rather she suffer than accept a helping hand from conservatives. Kennedy's voice swelled with genuine indignation. You used your grandmother's pain as a political weapon. You used her broken home to attack Trump, bash Republicans, and build your brand as a champion for Puerto Rico. And when people actually stepped up to help, when Americans from all walks of life gave their hard-earned money, you blocked it because it ruined your narrative. He pulled out the financial records. Now, let's look at your own finances during that exact period. This was June 2021, when those photos were posted. You were living in a luxury apartment for $3,400 a month and driving a $48,000 Tesla. Your net worth was roughly $1.5 million, largely from merch sales and speaking gigs. Your grandmother only needed about $30,000 to fix her roof and make her home safe. Kennedy ran the numbers on the screen. You were bringing home a $174,000 congressional salary that year. You pulled in about $800,000 from merchandise and speaking fees. You had a net worth of $1.5 million. Your grandmother needed $30,000. That is just 2% of your total net worth. You could have written that check yourself. You could have handled the repairs personally. You could have quietly taken care of your own family. His voice turned cutting. But you chose not to. You didn't help her at all. Instead, you exploited her suffering just to get social media clicks. You exploited her broken home as a weapon against your rivals. When those same opponents stepped up to help, you turned them down in her name just to protect your public image. Kennedy then produced a set of documents showing the timeline. Do you want to know what's truly twisted? You spent months sharing posts about your grandmother's hardships. You featured her in countless speeches about Puerto Rico, climate change, and systemic failure. Yet you never breathed a word about the $100,000 that was raised and then refused. You failed to mention that a solution was right there on the table. You simply continued to profit from her pain. He stared straight at AOC, his face filled with visible contempt. So, allow me to break this down. You used your own grandmother's misery for political gain, and when help arrived, you rejected it because it came from the wrong side of the aisle. You let her languish in squalor while you enjoyed a life of privilege. And you pulled this off while pretending to be a champion for the weak, for family, and for the community. Kennedy's tone shifted into something far more chilling. That isn't just politics, Congresswoman. That is pure sociopathy. That's treating your own grandmother like a piece of stage equipment. That's putting your personal brand ahead of her basic welfare. That's picking a political edge over your own flesh and blood. And it reveals to everyone precisely who you are at your core. He then presented one last piece of evidence. Eventually, without any fanfare, her roof was repaired about 6 months later. There was no press release from your office and no social media updates. It was all done in the shadows. People believe your family finally took some of that donated cash once the cameras stopped rolling, though you've never admitted to it. How incredibly convenient. Kennedy began tidying his notes. Imagine what would happen to me if I exploited my grandmother's pain for clout and then blocked help just because it came from the Democrats. I would never be elected in Louisiana ever again. But you walked away with sympathy. You gained social media engagement. You got to play the victim while you were actually victimizing your own relative. He turned his gaze directly into the lens. If this makes your skin crawl as much as it should, if you believe family comes before the party, and that using a grandmother's pain for clicks is morally hollow, then make sure everyone sees this. Kennedy looked back at AOC with a frigid expression. Since our time is short, let me wrap this all up. I'm going to give you that education you so graciously offered me. Allow me to show you what actual economics looks like. And let me explain why every single thing you believe is fundamentally flawed. Kennedy rose, fastened his suit jacket, and stepped into the center of the room. His whole vibe had completely shifted. The folksy charm and Southern gentleman act were gone. This was now a prosecutor delivering his final blow. Congresswoman, when we started this morning, you suggested I enroll in an economics course. You hinted that I'm too old, too Southern, and too unlearned to wrap my head around your modern theories. You claimed I'm stuck in the past and can't handle how today's economic systems work. He took a beat and stared right at her. So, allow me to return the courtesy. Let me teach you, not with slogans and buzzwords, but with real-world principles, logic, math, and cold, hard reality. Kennedy reached for his detailed set of notes. At its heart, economics isn't that complicated. It's all about trade-offs. Resources aren't infinite. Time is always running out. Every single decision carries an opportunity cost. When you spend $1 here, you lose the ability to spend it there. When you roll out a policy, you have to live with the fallout. These aren't just ideas in a textbook. These are the basic truths of how our world functions. He held up a basic chart for everyone to see. You're looking to drop $93 trillion on the Green New Deal. Fine, let's just use that number for the sake of this debate. Where is all that cash supposed to come from? You say we should just tax the rich, but we've already proven that's a mathematical impossibility. Seizing every penny from every billionaire only gets you $5 trillion, which is nowhere near $93 trillion. So, let's examine what would really go down. Kennedy stepped over to a whiteboard and began calculating. To hit $93 trillion in a decade, you'd have to hike federal revenue by $9.3 trillion every single year. Right now, federal revenue sits at about $4.5 trillion. That means you'd have to more than triple what we collect in taxes. To do that, tax rates would have to skyrocket for everyone. Not just the wealthy, but every single taxpayer. Middle-class families would watch their tax bills double or even triple. He turned back to look her in the eye. Now, what do you think happens when you triple everyone's taxes? Fundamental economics, the kind taught at places like Vanderbilt and Oxford, proves that high taxes crush economic activity. People don't work as hard when they get to keep less of their paycheck. Companies stop investing when their profits are heavily drained by the government. Economic growth grinds to a halt, or dies completely. Kennedy jotted down a few more figures. When the economy stalls, tax revenue actually drops instead of rising. It's a concept known as the Laffer curve. Sky-high tax rates actually end up bringing in less revenue than moderate ones because they just crush the economy. So, your plan to raise $93 trillion by taxing the rich would actually stifle growth and lower total revenue. You'd end up with less money in the bank, not more. He set down the marker and started walking toward her. But let's just say for a moment, we ignore all of that. Let's say a miracle occurs and you actually get your $93 trillion. What would you really even achieve? You want to completely eliminate fossil fuels within 10 years? That means 10 million direct and indirect jobs in oil, gas, coal, and all related industries. What's going to happen to all those workers? Kennedy's tone grew sharper. You talk about job retraining. Great, wonderful. But let me tell you the story of Joe Thompson. It's a made-up name, but he represents dozens of real people I've actually met. Joe is 52 years old. He's spent 30 years working in the coal mines of West Virginia. He brings home $67,000 a year. It's tough, dangerous work, but it's honest labor that puts food on his family's table. He laid out the scenario. Under your proposal, Joe loses his livelihood. You offer him some retraining to become a solar panel installer. But that job only pays $32,000 a year, less than half of what he's making now. Joe has a monthly mortgage payment of $400. His daughter is in college, which costs $15,000 a year. And his wife is dealing with medical bills. How is Joe supposed to survive on $32,000 when his life costs him $67,000? Kennedy's voice began to rise. The truth is, he can't. He ends up losing his home. His daughter has to quit college. His entire family starts to crumble. But you don't really care about Joe because he doesn't live in Brooklyn or Queens. Joe lives in a corner of West Virginia you've never seen and probably never will. To you, Joe is just collateral damage in your grand revolution. He pulled up even more data. And Joe is just one of 10 million souls whose jobs you would wipe out. That's 10 million families you would destroy. And all of this is for a plan that wouldn't even work, because countries like China, India, and other developing nations will keep using fossil fuels, making every American sacrifice completely pointless. Kennedy moved over to another part of the whiteboard. Now, let's look at your other brilliant policy, defunding the police. You saw the aftermath in New York. Crime rates went through the roof. It took longer for help to arrive, and real people died. It's simple economics. When you cut the supply of something, in this case, police protection, while the demand stays exactly the same, you're going to get shortages, slower response times, less coverage, and a lot more crime. He turned back to look her in the eye. The people who get hurt the most by cutting police protection are the poor families living in high-crime areas. Wealthy people just hire their own private security. They'll be just fine. But the working-class families who rely on the public police force, they're the ones who suffer. That is economics 101. You slashed the supply, created a massive shortage, and made the poorest citizens pay the ultimate price. Kennedy's voice took on a biting edge. Now, let's talk about that Amazon deal. You tanked a deal that would have brought in 67,000 jobs and sparked $27 billion in economic growth. You claimed it was just corporate greed and called the tax incentives corporate welfare. Let me show you exactly why you're mistaken. He started writing on the board once more. Amazon would have generated $27 billion in total economic value over a decade. New York offered them $3 billion in tax incentives to make it happen. That's a net benefit of $24 billion. That isn't welfare. That's an investment that yields an 800% return. There isn't an investor on the planet who wouldn't jump at that deal. Kennedy stared her down. But the problem is, you don't understand how investment works. You don't realize that sometimes you have to trade short-term revenue for massive long-term growth. You look at $3 billion in tax breaks and see a giveaway without grasping the $27 billion you'd be getting back. That isn't economics. That is pure economic illiteracy. He went back to his seat and pulled out a thick stack of notes. Since you've suggested I need an education in economics, let me tell you about mine. Kennedy's voice shifted into a formal, professional tone. I studied economics at Vanderbilt University, where I mastered the concepts of supply and demand, market equilibrium, and how price signals allocate resources. I graduated with top honors. From there, I went to the University of Virginia School of Law to study constitutional economics, basically how economic principles clash with our legal and political systems. Then, I attended Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship. He paused to let that sink in. At Oxford, I studied under experts like Professor John Eatwell. Professor Eatwell taught me advanced economic theory, ranging from socialist to Marxist economics. I didn't just learn why socialism might sound good on paper. I learned exactly why it fails in the real world, why central planning can never keep up with market efficiency, and why killing profit incentives always kills innovation and productivity. I learned why every single socialist experiment in history has ended in either poverty, authoritarianism, or both. Kennedy's voice turned cold. I've forgotten more about economics than you have ever even managed to learn. I've been studying this subject since before you were even born. I've watched our socialist policies crash and burn in the real world, wrecking economies and crushing ordinary people. I've seen bartenders turned politicians with just a bachelor's degree and a ton of ego lecture others on economics while knowing absolutely nothing. He got up again and stepped toward her. Do you want to know what modern economics actually teaches? It teaches that incentives are everything, that free markets manage resources better than governments, that property rights create wealth, and that socialism fails because it fights against human nature. People simply work harder when they get to keep the fruits of their labor. Kennedy pulled out a stack of academic papers. These are from today's top economists, Nobel winners, and Federal Reserve officials, the best in the business. Every single one of them concludes that your Green New Deal is economically illiterate. This isn't just Republican rhetoric. It's the economic consensus. Your ideas just don't work. They've never worked. They will never work because they ignore the basic laws of economic reality. He stared her down, his voice turning personal. You've never actually created a single job. You've never built a business from the ground up. You've never had to meet a payroll. You've never had to choose between paying the rent and buying food. You went from being a bartender to a congresswoman to a millionaire in just 3 years. You live in total luxury, drive a Tesla, wear designer clothes, dine at high-end restaurants, and then have the nerve to lecture working people about sacrifice. Kennedy's voice built to a powerful crescendo. You wiped out 67,000 jobs with your stance on Amazon.
You triggered a crime wave with your defund policy. You exploited your own grandmother just to score political points. You're funneling campaign funds directly to your boyfriend. You sell $4 million in merchandise while trashing capitalism. You live in a $3,400 apartment while representing people who can barely afford $1,800 rent. You attend $35,000 galas while preaching about inequality. He walked right up to her desk and looked down at her. And yet, you have the audacity and the absolute arrogance to suggest that I'm the one who needs an economics lesson. Kennedy's voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous tone. Let me explain what I understand that you clearly don't.
I understand that capitalism has pulled more people out of poverty than any other system in history. I understand that free markets succeed while central planning always fails. I understand that a steady job is far better than a government handout. Opportunity beats dependency every time, and freedom is always better than government control. I understand that when politicians promise free stuff, somebody else is always footing the bill. I understand that having good intentions doesn't make up for disastrous results. He grabbed his accordion file and held it up for everyone to see. This file holds your entire record, your votes, your quotes, your policies, and your failures. Every bit of evidence I've shown today comes from your own actions, your own words, and your own choices. I didn't invent any of this. I didn't twist anything out of context. This is simply who you are. Kennedy turned his gaze to the camera one last time. If you're fed up with privileged socialists who've never created a job lecturing you about the economy, if you're tired of politicians living like capitalists while they preach socialism, if you've had enough of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, share this far and wide. Record this. Save it. Show it to anyone who thinks she's the future of this country. Because Americans deserve better than a representative who doesn't understand economics, doesn't understand math, and doesn't know the difference between a slogan and a real solution. He turned back to AOC with a cold, hard stare. Class dismissed. Congresswoman, I hope you learned something, though based on your entire record, I seriously doubt it. Kennedy sat down, snapped his accordion file shut, and folded his hands. The hearing room went deathly silent. You could hear the breathing, the clicking of cameras, and a nervous cough. But not a single word was spoken. AOC just sat there, frozen. Her face was a mask of pure rage and deep humiliation. She had walked in so confident, flanked by her supporters, ready to push the Green New Deal. She had insulted Kennedy, thinking he was an easy target, an old Southern senator she could outshine with her modern views. Instead, she had been methodically dismantled. Every single policy was picked apart and found to be a failure. Every claim was proven wrong with cold, hard evidence. Every defense she had was crushed by the facts. Her hypocritical lifestyle was put on full display. Her lack of economic knowledge was laid bare. Her moral bankruptcy was completely documented. The committee chairman cleared his throat to break the silence. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, do you wish to respond to Senator Kennedy's questions? She opened her mouth to speak, closed it, and tried one more time. Nothing coherent came out. She scrambled through her papers, desperately searching for a talking point. But really, what was left to say? Everything Kennedy had presented was backed by the record. Her own words, her votes, and her financial records are all public knowledge. This is clearly a partisan attack, she stammered. She finally found her voice, though it was shaking. It's based on sexism and ageism. But Kennedy interrupted gently, his Southern courtesy returning, noting that he had only cited her own campaign filings, statements, voting record, and basic math. If facts are sexist, then reality itself has a bias problem. AOC tried to push back once more. The senator is taking things out of context, she claimed, but he noted that he had read her speeches in their entirety. He pointed out that he had provided every quote in its entirety. He had included all the necessary context. And according to him, the context only made things look worse, not better. She made one last attempt. "This hearing is just a distraction from the real issues," she argued. Kennedy just flashed that dangerously sharp smile of his. "The real issues," he countered, "are economic literacy, government honesty, and the fact that every policy has real consequences. We just spent the last 2 hours focused on very real issues. Extremely real. They are painfully real for the 67,000 people who lost out on Amazon jobs, and for Carmen Ramirez, who lost her son." AOC stood up abruptly, gathered her papers with trembling hands, and walked out. She didn't even wait to be formally dismissed. She didn't bother making a closing statement. She just left her squad supporters scrambling to catch up while the cameras caught every second of her retreat. The hearing room immediately erupted. Reporters raced for the exits, already typing away on their phones. Those in the conservative gallery began to applaud, not out of spite, but in genuine appreciation for the accountability they'd just seen. Even a few Democrats looked deep in thought, clearly bothered by what they had just witnessed. Kennedy just sat there quietly, tucking his papers back into that massive accordion file and looking like he'd just finished a routine day at the office. Because for him, it was. 4 decades as a lawyer had taught him the drill. Be prepared. Present the evidence clearly. Let the facts speak for themselves. And if someone insults you, prove them so wrong that they can't recover for at least 12 minutes. The hashtag Louisiana Lesson was soon trending at #1 worldwide. Within an hour, the video clips had already racked up 15 million views. By the end of the day, 89 million people had watched Kennedy systematically dismantle AOC's record. Every major news organization was forced to cover the story. CNN attempted a defense, but they couldn't ignore the hard evidence. MSNBC labeled it troubling, but they still had to acknowledge the facts. Fox News, of course, kept it on a constant loop. Conservative media outlets hailed it as the greatest political takedown of the modern era. However, the impact of the hearing went far deeper than just cable news gossip. The very next morning, a moderate Democrat named Jennifer Williams announced she was challenging AOC in the primary. Williams was a former prosecutor and the daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants who had grown up right there in the Bronx. Her announcement was short and simple. "I love our community," she said. "I actually understand economics, and I won't use my grandmother's hardships just to get likes on Instagram." In just her first week, Williams raised $3.2 million, more than AOC raised in her entire first campaign. Donations flooded in from all over, including from conservatives who would never vote Democrat, but desperately wanted AOC out. They also came from moderate Democrats who were embarrassed by her extreme views. They came from people who lost those Amazon jobs, from victims of crime, and from families struggling to pay their energy bills. The polling numbers were absolutely devastating. In just 2 weeks, AOC's approval rating in her own district plummeted by 34 points. The negative feedback was brutal. 67% of voters said she simply doesn't understand economics. 71% felt she cares more about her own fame than her constituents, and 58% believed she should resign immediately. To make matters worse, the squad began to distance themselves from her. Rashida Clay made some vague statements about needing to focus on Detroit. Ayanna Pressley suddenly found herself with scheduling conflicts whenever she was asked to campaign with AOC. Even Ilhan Omar, who isn't exactly famous for her own political savvy, quietly stopped bringing her up. The National Democratic leadership could see the writing on the wall. Behind closed doors, They asked AOC to step away from her high-profile roles. When she refused, they stripped her of her committee assignments, citing the need for members who actually understand policy details. Her appearances in the media quickly dried up. Cable news networks stopped booking her altogether. The Kennedy hearing had exposed her so thoroughly that she'd become too much of a political liability. Political talk shows didn't want guests who could be dismantled by a simple fact check. Even the media outlets that used to be friendly toward her grew cautious. Her merchandise empire completely collapsed. As it turns out, people aren't exactly lining up to buy "Tax the Rich" sweatshirts from someone exposed as a champagne socialist. Within a single month, sales plummeted by 87%. Her campaign was forced to start laying people off. The staff could no longer afford their fancy offices and had to drastically scale back operations. Her speaking fees crashed from $40,000 per appearance down to just $5,000. And even those offers eventually stopped as organizations realized she was more of a liability than a draw. Her luxury apartment soon became too expensive to keep. She quietly moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in a much less trendy part of town. But the most significant impact of all was on the broader world of progressive politics. The Kennedy hearing turned into a textbook case study of what happens when progressive policies actually meet scrutiny. When catchy slogans collide with hard facts, and when confident ignorance meets documented knowledge, other progressive politicians started moderating their positions. Talk of the Green New Deal grew less specific and much more vague. Defund the police quietly morphed into reform the police. The chatter about a socialist revolution quieted down significantly. 18 months after that Louisiana lesson, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lost her primary to Jennifer Williams by 23 points. It wasn't even a close race. Her district had simply seen enough. They wanted someone who actually understood economics, who showed up for constituents, and who put Queens before Instagram. AOC isn't in Congress anymore. She works as a political commentator for fringe progressive outlets, making podcasts and YouTube videos for an audience that shrinks every month. She still tweets, but the engagement is just a fraction of what it used to be. The blue checkmark is still there, but the influence is gone. She lives in a modest apartment back in the Bronx. She had to sell the Tesla and buy a used Honda. The designer clothes are a thing of the past. That luxury lifestyle completely evaporated. She experienced downward mobility in real time, finally learning what her policies would have done to millions of Americans. Her memoir was quietly canceled by her publisher. The documentary about her that was in production got shelved. She has become a cautionary tale rather than a rising star. Political science professors now teach the Kennedy hearing as an example of what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and when facts defeat slogans. And then there's Senator John Kennedy. He is still in the Senate, still asking questions in that folksy drawl, and still pulling out accordion files whenever someone needs to be held accountable. The file from the AOC hearing was donated to the Smithsonian as an artifact of political history. But more importantly, Kennedy proved something essential. Respect isn't determined by your age, your accent, or your geography. It is earned through knowledge, integrity, and results. And when you lack all three, you shouldn't insult someone who has them. That accordion file became legendary in Washington. When politicians testify before committees that Kennedy sits on, they prepare exhaustively. They check their facts. They verify their numbers. They make sure their lifestyle matches their rhetoric, because nobody wants to be the next AOC. The Louisiana lesson wasn't just about one congresswoman's downfall. It was about the triumph of facts over feelings, arithmetic over ideology, and competence over confidence. It was about understanding that you can't spend money you don't have, no matter how good your intentions are. It was about realizing that eliminating jobs hurts the people who actually held those jobs. It showed that defunding the police leads to more crime. It proved that exploiting family for political gain is morally bankrupt. It was about recognizing that experience really matters. It showed that education is more than just a bachelor's degree. It demonstrated that someone who studied under Nobel Prize winners might know more about economics than someone who bartended through college. But most fundamentally, it was about accountability. It was about the idea that politicians should be judged by their results, not their rhetoric, by their competence, not their confidence, and by whether they actually help people, not just whether they sound good on social media. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thought 9 words would embarrass an old Southern senator. Perhaps the senator should take an economics class. Those were 9 words spoken with such casual contempt, such unearned arrogance, and such certainty that she was smarter than everyone else. She was wrong. And for 2 hours, Senator John Kennedy, Rhodes Scholar, Oxford economist, and Louisiana lawyer, educated her in ways she never expected and will never forget. He taught her that capitalism lifts people out of poverty, while socialism keeps them there. He showed her that free markets work and central planning fails. He proved that jobs are better than handouts and that opportunity beats dependency. He taught that good intentions don't excuse bad outcomes, and confidence is no substitute for competence. He taught her that when you kill 67,000 jobs, families suffer. He showed that when you defund the police, crime increases. He pointed out that when you exploit your grandmother, people notice. He made it clear that when you live like a capitalist while preaching socialism, you're a hypocrite. He demonstrated that when you funnel campaign money to your boyfriend while attacking corruption, you're a fraud. Most importantly, he taught her and everyone watching that there are consequences for actions, that policies affect real people, that elections have consequences, and that arithmetic doesn't care about your ideology. The accordion file contained 37 sections of documentation, hundreds of pages, and thousands of facts, all of it public record, and all of it AOC's own doing. Senator Kennedy didn't destroy Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's career that day. She brought this on herself through years of double standards, financial ignorance, and ethical decay. Kennedy simply gathered the evidence, organized it, and laid it out so clearly that no one could miss it. This isn't just some political hit job. This is what real accountability looks like. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. If you value competence over swagger, if you believe real experience counts more than catchy slogans, and if you're fed up with elitists lecturing working folks about money while living in luxury, then share this story and comment below with your own run-ins with politicians who promise everything and deliver nothing. Because this is exactly what holding someone responsible looks like. This is what you get when hard facts collide with feelings and the facts come out on top. This is what happens when a former bartender with a basic degree tries to lecture a Rhodes Scholar armed with a file full of receipts. Senator John Kennedy did more than just take down Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that day. He reminded the country that we don't have to settle for financial nonsense, moral hypocrisy, or loud-mouthed ignorance from our leaders. We have the right to demand better. We should expect so much more. We can actually hold them to a higher standard. And when they disrespect us or those who represent us, we can give them a much-needed reality check. That's not being petty. That's being American. Class dismissed.